global trade growth slowed in 2018, and it's expected to be even more sluggish this year. As far as the World Trade Organization, that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The WTO chief Roberto Azevedo says many factors contributed to the slowdown, but singled out trade tensions as the biggest element.
Rising trade tensions are the major factor to the stories today. Over the last year, we have seen a range of new tariffs put in place, affecting widely traded goods. Trade simply cannot play its full role in driving GDP growth when levels of uncertainty are so high.
In its annual report, the WTO says trade growth slowed to 3% last year, from 4.6% in 2017. It had been weighed down by new tariffs and retaliatory measures, weak economic growth, volatility in financial markets, and tighter monetary conditions in developed countries. The trade body also urged countries locked in trade disputes to find a way to resolve them. That way, efforts to tackle what it calls real challenges to the economy can be charted. The chief of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, has echoed the WTO's concerns. Lagarde has previously warned against escalating trade tensions, saying global growth is not strong enough to withstand tariff fights and unilateralism.
Nobody wins a trade war. That is why we need to work together to reduce trade barriers and modernize the global trade system so that we all win.
The uncertainty of when and how Britain will leave the European Union is also adding to the gloomy outlook. The WTO said a no-deal Brexit could push trade growth to fall below its 2019 forecast, and that would mean more bad news for the global economy in the year to come. Laila Humairah, TRT World.
Let's get more on this now from Julia Lyubova, who joins us from Geneva. Hi, Julia. It's not a huge surprise to hear that the various trade wars launched by the US last year have had an impact on global trade. But tell us more about the other factors that the WTO has cited for this slowdown in trade.
Well, indeed, the main factor for the slowdown noted today by the World Trade Organization was the commercial tensions, and also it said that increased economic uncertainty was also to blame. But in 2018, trade grew just 3% instead of forecasted 3.9%. And this slowdown is expected to continue in 2019 as well. So the head of the WTO today said that because of trade tensions running high, it's hardly a surprise that this slowdown is in place and it will continue throughout this year. And of course, he was referring to trade wars between the United States and China. But however, the WTO also said that weaker global economic growth and volatility in financial markets, among others, were also factors to blame for this slowdown.
Okay, so what does the World Trade Organization suggest might help boost global growth to the levels that it previously forecast?
Well, indeed, the WTO says that the situation could change for the better if those commercial tensions stop. However, it said that if the United States goes ahead with imposing tariffs on its imports of cars, this would only make the situation worse, and it's not known exactly what effect would a no-deal Brexit would have, but it also poses a risk to the situation in 2019. However, the WTO noted that there is a potential for a slight improvement, but of course that will depend on easing of those trade tensions in the next few years.
As we know, the Trump administration has been pushing for wide-ranging reforms to the World Trade Organizations. Give us an idea of what those reforms are, and has there been any significant progress on that front?
Indeed, last year Donald Trump threatened to quit the World Trade Organization unless it, quote, shapes up and treats the US better. And the Trump administration was seeking help from the WTO over retaliatory tariffs from China, the European Union, Canada and Turkey. And it argued that those measures were illegal according to the WTO's rules. But of course, some experts do argue that the WTO does need some reforms, and those concerns have been addressed, for example, in last year's General Council by the WTO. But indeed, today, the World Trade Organization said that there is a need to safeguard the global trade system, and that's very important.
Okay, and before you go, Julia, does the WTO have a view on the US-China trade war? Negotiations, as we know, are still ongoing. Is it confident that the two will come to some sort of a resolution?
Indeed. So, like the WTO did say that those commercial tensions was one of the main factors in the slowdown, and it said that it has to stop for an improvement to be made. And of course, those negotiations are still ongoing. But indeed, according to this report that came out today, there is a hope that will stop, and or at least there'll be some kind of improvement to actually make things better. So we'll have to wait, of course, and see how those negotiations pan out in the next this year, later this year.
Okay, Julia Lyubova in Geneva, thanks so much for that update.